We've always, I say always, generally in the past, we've, at some point during the tour, we've done a free concert, something similar. In fact, last time it was the Venice show. And we certainly looked to do something similar on this tour. But there was nothing really that was practical that really worked and so on. We were talking a bit more about working London and so on. And it actually seemed a nicer idea to do these shows for charity rather than do a big... It more or less comes out to the same thing, really. But this gives each of the charities an opportunity to raise their profile slightly.
How did you choose the charities?
On a fairly sort of personal basis, really, of charities quite often that we'd done work for before, either as individuals or as a band. I think most of them have some sort of personal reason spread amongst us for the choice. And I have to say there are inevitably a whole bunch of charities that we'd love to have done something for and didn't. I mean, I think charities got missed out because we didn't think of them at the right moment, and there was also a feeling that really you could spread it too thin in order for it to really be of benefit to the individual charities. It wouldn't really work to have 100 charities all going in a little bit.
Just when it seemed the Floyd were charmed, it all went wrong. 2 blocks of seating at Earl's Court collapsed, throwing hundreds of people to the floor. The show was halted and 36 fans were taken to hospital. Luckily, all were out within days with no serious injuries.
I heard a noise that I thought was a fault on the PA or something. It sounded like a big crackling noise, but I thought... And then the house lights came on and I started grumbling at people why they turned the house lights back on again. And then someone told me what had happened. It was very unfortunate. We were very fortunate that there weren't more serious injuries.
Awful. Absolutely terrible. I just started playing and then the house lights came up and I assumed that someone on the house lights had got the wrong cue, and I carried on a bit and then everyone was saying stop, stop, stop. And then the worst bit was going backstage waiting to hear what had... Well, we knew what had happened, but how bad it was. And it really shook us up for a couple of days.
I think that our people who did the talking to the audience and the Red Cross people and all the emergency service reacted very quickly and very, very efficiently. It seemed to be dealt with admirably. But it would have been better if it hadn't happened at all.
We were not exactly getting bored, but we wanted to do more things, try new things out, and that seemed like that would be really good fun. That would have been it would have been too much work on the last tour with everything else that was going on and putting it all together to have done this. But on this one, we've had a bit more time because for the actual musicians and for me and Nick and Rick, there's a little less for us to do in terms of stress and worry and getting it all together initially. So we initiated a look through all our old stuff, finding out films and finding old sound effects tapes and stuff, and thought, well, that would be, if we could do it, we would give it a try. And we found all the bits we needed, or made some new bits, and put it together. It's quite a sort of emotional moment the first time we did it.
Yeah. And how does it feel now, 20 years later? I mean, obviously it's virtually a different band performing it. You've got different musicians. Obviously, the technology's changed, almost out of recognition. How does this compare to the original?
It's very hard to tell, to be honest with you. I can't remember that well. I mean, I've listened to a couple of bootlegs, and we are in terms of pure sort of music and professionalism, it's sort of light years ahead of what we ever did. In those days, we had the girls singers, and we had Dick playing saxophone, which we have got again this time, different girls. But we didn't have second keyboard players or second guitar players or percussion or anything like that. So it was a little bit simpler. There were more parts that were on the record were missing, which one hoped one made up for in general verve and enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. But it's very nice to be able to play it this way and sort of... Because like the last time we played Dark Side of the Moon was 1975, I think, if my memory serves me well. Mm. So it's been an awful long time, and it's nice to be able to play it the way it should be played, I suppose.
Does it feel different performing it without Roger Waters?
Yes, of course. It's kind of odd doing the last two songs, Brain Damage and Eclipse, which are the two songs that Roger sang originally, and which means I have to sing them now, so that's slightly a different thing. But we've been playing a lot of the songs from it anyway, so we're quite used to doing most of the stuff. But it does feel different. It was quite, like I say, it was quite a good emotional moment the first night we did it. We were all quite nervous.
It's something we've talked about actually, certainly for the last 10 years or so, that some of these records would benefit from being played as complete pieces, and Dark Side perhaps more than most of the others. And it does have a different character if it's played in that way rather than piecemeal.
And how does it feel now, playing it 20 years later?
It's still great fun. I mean, the interesting thing is that you find yourself changing things, and then going back to the record, having another listen, and perhaps changing back again. The tendency is to overplay it all the time, and the thing really is to find the elements in it that are important, and sort of, one doesn't just want to recreate the record live, or I don't find that particularly amusing, but I think you want to recreate the feel of the record.
Which parts of this show do you personally enjoy performing the most?
I don't think there's any one specific part that's the greatest fun. I mean, I suppose from a fun point of view, replaying Astronomy, which was something that...
Astronomy Dominate?
Yes, which we have played it. Well, we've done it at a lot of the shows, and that's great fun, because again, it's something that has... Well, we haven't played live for 20-odd years, I think.
Here we are back, Pink Floyd back in Earl's Court for the first time since The Wall. Do you have any thoughts on Now and Then as far as that goes? Does it feel good to be back here?
It feels, yes, it feels, of course, very good to be back. And for me, particularly, a lot better. As, sorry, The Wall is when I was going to, had left the band, but was going to, played out The Wall concerts. So it was a pretty sad and pretty angry time for me. So this is rather different.
So there was a spirit of band unity was...
That wasn't so good then.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's completely different. But I'm very interested in, having done this whole tour and has come from places like Rome, is how the English audience is going to react, actually.
Are English audiences more difficult?
They can, not difficult, they just don't respond in the same way. And we're so used to having incredible response, particularly in Italy and Spain.
We have a sort of legendary status that follows us around. I mean, and from what we have been doing in recent years on the last tour and on this tour, I mean, if I were an 18-year-old, and from what people actually say, I mean, what people who've been to see it say about our shows, I would think it was something worth going to see. So I don't really know.
There's been a lot of talk here, anyway, about the way in which Pink Floyd are in some ways, the forerunners of ambient music. Have you noticed that in the kind of audiences that you've been playing to?
In the audiences? No, I haven't. I don't get all that. I don't really buy it, all this former godfathers of ambient music or stuff. I mean, I don't see that we
Some
have
of
an
the
awful lot to do
musicians
with it.
themselves have actually said it, haven't they? I mean, it hasn't just
Well,
been
I'm
media
very happy
attention.
if we have been influential in those ways, but I'm afraid it's not vastly reciprocated.
Right. So the Orb are not people that you recognise as your musical progeny in a way.
Not much, not really an awful lot. Having been to see them, you were there.
Yes, it was hard to spot, I must say. How does a show like this evolve over time? I mean, you've played, what, 120 odd dates so far?
I'm not counting. I don't know. It's somewhere around
A
100.
lot, anyway.
Yeah, it's... Well, you just change it around. You try different things out, and some nights you come off saying, well, we won't try that again. And you move songs into different order, try them out, and gradually it seems to settle down into a running order and a choice of songs that you kind of enjoy doing a bit more. But we still change it around.
And is there room in a show, which is obviously, it has to be pretty tightly organised, is there room for a lot of musical improvisation when you're actually up there, or are you pretty much running along tracks once you start?
We don't run to any codes or specific time things. The films and things aren't actually in specific sync. So there are moments which have to be right, but most of the time we're fairly free to do as we please. The computerized lighting cues and so on and so forth are on a button, so when you want to change, you get to that point and change. You don't, it's not all down to the clock.
In some ways, I think we'll all miss it when we stop.
The way these things work, it's you have to compress the shows into as small a time as possible, and it's about enough for me for the time being.
7 months, but without any breaks, and which I think really is a bit too long. But I'm looking forward to the end, of course. But I'm also sad because I don't know when the next tour will be. And it's always sad to finish a tour, particularly this one that's been so successful and happy.
We're not retiring, but I don't know what we're going to do or when.
I think it's very easy to get stuck in the cycle of spend a year recording, then spend a year and a half touring, and then go on holiday for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. But I think it would probably be better for us, creatively, to do some smaller scale. I mean, it could be shows, it could be recording, it could be a record that isn't. I've no idea what it would be, but I think most of us would like to avoid entering that cycle, the sort of 2.5-year cycle.
The time people were standing there in little suits, with those Gibson E2 kind of bass guitars held against the chest, going like that. And although it wasn't very complicated stuff, it wasn't something I was interested in. I found that if you turned the thing up loud and used a plectrum, and I had a Rickenbacker which I bought with a grant. In fact, my entire term's grant one term. And if you banged it hard, and it made strange noises when I found that if you pushed the strings against the pickups, it made funny clicking noises. And we were taping the show, and we would do the run through, and Sid would stand there with his Telecaster with the silver bits all over it and mime happily. And then they'd go, "Okay, guys, we're going to do it now. Roll the tape, and playback, and go." And he'd go, and stand there and not move a muscle. And then, cut, no, we're going to do it now. He knew, of course, perfectly well what was going on. He was just being crazy. And they did 4 or 5 takes like that. Eventually, I mimed it.
I didn't know Roger, but I knew Sid. And Sid went up to an art school in London, and Roger went up to an architecture school in London, where he met Nick and Rick.
Du jeune Sid Barrett que Pink Floyd voit le jour. Le groupe compte alors Roger Waters à la basse et aux voix, Rick Wright au clavier et Nick Mason.
We played at at Joe Boyd's club in the Tottenham Court Road, the Blarney Club, what was called UFO, a lot.
The way the act's developed in the last 6 months has been influenced rather a lot by the fact that we've played in ballrooms, necessarily, because that this is obviously the first market. But I think concerts have given us a chance to realise that maybe the music we play isn't directed at dancing necessarily like normal pop groups.
Well, I met all of the Pink Floyd very early on, long before they became successful, because Sid was a friend of mine. But I guess I didn't really get to know them until shortly before Sid was about to retire, hurt. God, it's a long time.
Really, everyone knows the story of Sid. It's a very, very sad story, because I really think he would have been one of the, if not the best writer in rock music, if he had survived the terrible period this period when the drugs, basically. He's disappeared. I mean, he's still alive, just lives with his mother in Cambridge. The last time I saw him was when we were doing Wish You Were Here.
I don't think anyone thinks about quite how timeless it's going to be. I mean, when you start, I don't think anyone really thinks about beyond the next 2 or 3 years and whether it will or won't be going. I never saw any reason to stop, though. I never thought of anything that I would have more fun doing.
If we could talk for a minute about Roger, if that's...
I knew this would come up.
Read my lips. I'm not going to talk about it.
We are Pink Floyd, Roger's left. It's a very simple matter. In my mind, it's a simple matter.
to keep this whole touring thing on the road at the moment is probably costing about $600,000 a week to tour it. And that includes this group here and then the various other groups that are setting up outdoor stages in 2 or 3 other cities at the same time.
From day to day, it's hard to remember what town you're in.
What day, what your name is, what band this is.
It's about a week cycle. We take like 3 days to build the steel in each place, then we come in for a day to set up the production, 1 show day, and then 2 days to get out. So it's 7 days that we need a facility for. We need to open the doors in 15 minutes.
You know, I used to do interviews years and years ago. We all did, you know, back in the 60s.
But that was a long time ago. You stopped for...
Yeah. It became perfectly obvious, you know, that the interview, talking to people, was a complete waste of time. Because they weren't actually interested in talking about anything. They were interested in getting the paper out and selling newspapers and stuff, not in talking to me or anyone else in the band. And those papers still exist. All those silly music papers are all still there. And they're all still about, you know, Joe Bloggs is God. they're, you know, so they're a joke.
So you don't look at it as a criteria, it's just that you don't have any use for that nonsense.
Well, it's also, it can waste an awful lot of your time, I would think. You know, if you do that a lot, I would imagine that Macca, bless him, who does interviews with everybody all the bloody time, you know, he must spend a couple of days a week doing all that and having lunch with people and, or maybe even more than a couple of days a week and all of that. Well, you know, so it's 3 days a week. Well, that's 3/7 of your life spent promoting yourself.
One of the songs, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, caused such outrageous public controversy that even the Archbishop of Canterbury himself had an opinion.
Runcie, his name is. Very nice man. I heard him, I think, being interviewed, and somebody asked him about the record. Oh no, he was quoted in the newspaper because there was terrible furor here about we don't need no education. And he was very good. He said, that he didn't understand why people were getting angry about it, or rather that he could, but that what he thought people should be doing was saying, well, if the school kids are picking up on the lyrics of the song, whether they understand it or not.
In the making of that movie, I mean, you were there daily and watching the rushes and so forth. So how did that happen?
Well, how did that happen? As you know, I got on terribly badly with Parker. Filthy little swine.
Russell, let me just ask you not to hold your true feelings back. Just let it out. If you got something to say about somebody, let us know.
No, I didn't know. It was you know, it was not a happy time making the film, unfortunately.
Well, you know, in all fairness to the project, I mean, you know, The Wall as an album is so complex, and it deals with so many different areas that it's, you know, it's not the easiest thing to, it's not like a group of folk songs that you're trying to depict.
No. But when you're doing something like that, and there are all kinds of personal and political battles going on in the team of people who are trying to make the thing, it's inevitable that it's going to come out with, you know, a bit of a kind of sour taste for everybody. Really.
Do you think that that is something that show business is more burdened with than other careers, and that is this ego battle that seems to go on, as opposed to, look, why don't we just roll up our sleeves, leave our egos at home, and get the project done? It seems like, you know, movie making, there's always this...
Yeah. Oh, I'm quite certain that that's true, yeah.
Is that because you're dealing with creative people?
No, it's because show business is basically, look at me!
Mm-hmm. Look at me, yeah.
That's all it is. So when that's what, you know, that's the basic motivation for you, Jim, me, and everyone else involved.
What's psychological bricks in your own personality?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
do you find most troublesome to relieve?
I don't know. It's too difficult. That question. It affects my short game. I can't chip.
And I'm going to ask this one more time.
It's fear. Yeah.
Fear?
What? Well, no. I mean, bricks are about fear.
Yeah.
You know, all those bricks they're all different fears of one thing or the other. I don't know what my greatest fear is. But fear is what stops you being good at golf. It's what stops you doing most things in life. It's fear. You know, I used to be the chairman of the youth campaign for nuclear disarmament in Cambridge, and I went on all the Order Master marches, you know, for years and years and years and years. I don't know why I don't go anymore. I do it anymore.
Because you're obviously...
I have no answer to that question, really. Maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I became disillusioned, and some of that disillusionment still clings to me, though I think there is a kind of resurgence of feeling particularly among young people now, that they can make a protest and that protest will be heard, and I think they're bloody well right, too. I do think it has some effect, and that the numbers are swelling. But, you know, this is when you start talking about the politics on that kind of level, it's really philosophy rather than politics that you're talking about. The thing is that, you know, the notion of the nuclear standoff is so obviously a non-starter. I mean, if you were starting, say you're starting with two sides, you'd never go for that option. I know, here's a great idea. Why don't we both, you know, have really, really horrible weapons, and then we'll never fight each other. You know, you wouldn't... That's great. You know, you'd go, no, that's not a very good idea. Let's think of something else. You know?
That's great, yeah.
How about meeting once in a while and talking to each other? Well, yeah, maybe, except, you know, you smell of garlic. Well, maybe we could meet, you know, maybe we could have glass between us or something. So you could, yeah, all right, let's do that. Or any one of any number of other options, you know. I think things have, since late 60s, early 70s, I think things in the music industry have changed for the worse, in general.
That's it.
Well, it feels now as if the media have got it far more under control. They didn't, you know, in the aftermath of the Beatles, and I don't know, with bands like us and the Who and a few other people, it was more out of control. They didn't quite know what was happening. Now it's settling back into kind of formula, you know? And particularly the thing with the selling of records using video. You know, it appears to me anyway that the business has now decided what the market is and how you sell to it, and all that's been sorted out, and so you get. Mind you, this may all be a complete illusion. It may simply be because I lie in bed on Saturday morning and turn the television on and see, you know, programs and images projected of the world of popular music, which may have nothing to do with the truth at all. I suppose in order to find out what's actually going on, you would have to analyze all the record sales and things and so on. But I have a feeling that the projection that comes across may well be close to the truth, and that it's much more now about image and about selling. It's much more about advertising now.
Some passing involvement with, by the name of Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
What is the current status of Pink Floyd as a band?
It's on a shelf.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's neither here nor gone.
Yeah.
On the shelf.
Yeah.
And If you were to express a personal hope, not getting into all the business ramifications and contractual stuff, but just your personal hope for Pink Floyd, what would that be?
I don't really think about that a lot. I don't know. I hope whatever happens, it's graceful.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
The Division Bell, how is this tour going so far?
Well, we've done God knows how many shows in America. It's all gone brilliantly.
And is this bigger, better, more spectacular than anything we're likely to see?
Better, I hope. I don't care if it's bigger or not myself. There's an awful lot of fuss about the dollars and cents that goes into putting it all together, but terribly dull, really.
Do you guys think about that, though? I mean, is it an issue to make something bigger than the last time you came out, for instance?
We try to avoid worrying about that. It's not an issue that we think about. We just want to try and make it very good. We're not necessarily bigger, but hopefully better.
I guess it's something that the fans have come to kind of expect in a way, though, isn't it? It's like, we'll go and see the biggest thing that we've seen forever.
Yeah, I guess we're a bit trapped by it, but it's fair dues.
And how about you have a show that you've already sort of, I guess, auditioned the show, if you like, in America. It's been there for, what, 4 months you've toured?
Yeah, 4 months on tour in America, yes.
And now you come over here. Does it change at all from Miami to where we are now, Spain, say?
We change it whenever we feel it requires a change, and we have made a few changes, or if we get bored, of course, in which case we might change it.
It's great to see you again. The last time I actually spoke to you, you were at the beginning of what turned out to be a year in the studio working on the Division Bell.
That's right.
Can you tell us just a little bit about the form that those sessions took and how that kind of worked?
Well, the most sort of significant thing from our point of view was that we tried a slightly different approach, and we went into the studios for a couple of weeks, just the three of us playing together, to see whether we could actually sort of invent anything as a band rather than entirely electronically. And I think it was really successful, and it was certainly a launching pad for the album as it then turned.
Was it like, did you feel like you could create again? Did it have a kind of like a good feeling about that?
Yeah, I think that was the significant thing, really, the fact that there was still something to be achieved with the three of us.
People have said about the album that it's like recreating your past almost, but I know you can't go into making something new with a desire to look back or be nostalgic. It has to take more than that. What was the kind of the impetus behind that? I mean, I know those sessions went really well, but for you?
Well, I think that as I was saying earlier, it's the significant thing is that it's a band working rather than individuals bringing songs in, and it's something that, I mean, it's very much the way we all started, and so it was really it's old-fashioned in so much as it's a return to a style of working, but I don't think the music necessarily is any older-fashioned for that.
There's a recovery of our past in the way it was sort of thought about in the first place, which is that myself and Rick and Nick got together with Guy to rehearse and jam together in a studio for a couple of weeks, which is where a lot of the basic ideas came from. But it was a much more cooperative effort than the previous album, the Momentary Lapse of Reason album was. And so there was no attempt to make it sound like anything we'd done before, but I mean, we sound like we sound, so if we're all contributing and playing together, then it does tend to sound a bit like Pink Floyd.
I think the only thing that I'd like to see change in the future is that I don't think one always wants to get stuck into a cycle of album tour. That this is something, it's partly a sort of habit, and it's partly the concept of promoting a record, and it's partly the problem of bootlegging, of course, because in the old days, what used to happen in the old days, it was possible to actually rehearse a record on the road and then actually record it. And of course that's no longer possible because you find that everyone's issued the record months ahead. But it would be nice perhaps to find other ways of working so that you weren't always stuck into a sort of what has become the music industry cycle.
I think R.E.M. have tried not to do that, but you guys I think would be perfect for that because the Pink Floyd idea doesn't actually rely on having hit singles and then touring and doing like that. I mean, your longevity is created out of something more than that, I think.
Yes, I think our problem is that because we tend to work, or certainly tend to make records pretty slowly, We also are under some obligation, the record company, to promote the record when we've made it, rather than just sort of say, well, here you are, good luck, goodbye. Take it away and sell it.
Rick Wright, hey, it's great to see you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hello, Europe. This tour, which by all accounts is huge, what are the logistics of mounting something like this, the Division Bell tour?
Obviously huge. Luckily, I don't have to do it. Luckily, I just have to go on stage and play the keyboards. It is a massive organisation, obviously, and I think everyone's heard about the 500 tons of steel, etc., etc., 60 trucks and all that. It is a massive organisation.
Have you guys had much to do with it from, say, the beginning when you've got the album together and you're thinking about going on the road? Do you have anything to do with the way it now eventually looks?
Yes, I mean, during the album, at that point, there were discussions, of course, going on with Robbie and Mark Fisher about the staging and all these kind of things that were happening while we were making the album.
Do you like this aspect of it?
This aspect of
being in Pink Floyd, of getting this whole thing up and getting on the road?
Yes, I do. Of course I do, yes. But what I really like is being up on stage. Because the other side, it's a lot of headaches. And that's why we have people like Robbie and Mark to deal with these problems. But we haven't had actually any problems. But really my role is only to go on stage and play the music, you know, and put our ideas in what we'd like to see. And I mean, we're changing the show right now. We're changing it and we're discussing already about when the screen should go up and all these kind of things. I mean, we are constantly changing it in little details.
How much of this show that we're going to see in Europe is different to what you've already done in the States?
It's essentially the same show. We are changing some of the music around. We're putting Shine On in the beginning of the show because we feel it's actually, Stromny Domny was great, but they don't really know the song, so we're trying to do it the other way around now, putting Shine On in the beginning, which we think works. So we're changing numbers around, but essentially it's the same as Europe, as America.
Do you guys feel any pressure to, I mean, everybody, your fans expect Pink Floyd shows to be a spectacular. Do you feel that there's a pressure to make it bigger, better, more extravagant, say, than the last time you went out?
There is that pressure, yes. They do expect it to be bigger and better. And whether it's a pressure or not, I think we want to make it bigger and better each time we go out anyway. So it's not that much for pressure.
We would have an option to do a much smaller show or a show with far less effects and probably then a cheaper show. But actually that's not what interests us and what we like doing and what's great about sort of being in our position at the moment is the fact that we can go and then do the sort of ultimate techno show. And we, instead of sort of saying, well, what's the cheapest lasers, we can say, well, what are the best lasers? What are the biggest, most powerful, and so on.
So I wrote Great Gig, yes.
Can you remember back that far? What was it all about? What was the impetus behind that?
It wasn't about anything. It was just a piece of piano music I had at the time when we were doing Dark Side. And I was playing it, everyone loved it, and I remember that we had no concept for the vocals on it at all. And we got Claire Torrey to come in, and she said, well, what do you want me to do? And we said, well, basically just sing whatever you feel like. And she came out with this incredible, this half vocal, half screaming idea on it. And of course, as you know, it worked rather well. And works brilliantly now with our three singers, I think, on live. For me, it's one of the high points as well. Yes, when the three girls sing their three separate parts, which I think they do brilliantly, girls.
You're a band that seems to me to have survived a long amount of time without the requisite number of hit singles. I mean, you've had a few, but not, you know, like every year come out with hit singles to keep things going. But you're also a band that seems not to need them. I mean, do you feel this?
Yes, I do. I feel that our success has come through combination of album work and live work, and singles have had not a lot to do with it. I mean, we had a single on our two biggest albums had singles on. In America we had Money on Dark Side of the Moon, and around the world we had Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 for the Wall album, which are our two most successful albums. So everyone will tell you that that helps an awful lot in our success. But we were always, before Dark Side of the Moon, able to sell out quite large places, and 2 singles in most people's careers in a sort of nearly 30-year career would not be considered successful. I suppose I would have to say we think we are.
Well, it must be something else, obviously, because for 2 and 30 years probably wouldn't keep the momentum going. But are you surprised at the longevity of your career? I mean, that there's a pressing plant, so I read, somewhere in Germany that just prints copies of Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, are you surprised that this is kind of keeping going?
Well, it's a lot of stories, aren't there? No, I'm not really surprised. We're quite good at it, he said modestly. You learn as much what not to do as what to do, but I don't consciously pick up things from what other people do. I mean, if it infiltrates into what's going on, that's fine with me, but I just go to gigs to see people that I enjoy, hopefully.
Enjoy watching other people do their thing?
Yeah.
I always want to ask you about the lyricist, your new lyricist, if you like, on the Division Bell. How, is also your fiancé, how does this working relationship come about? How do you guys work together?
Well, we started off, I went off to try and start writing lyrics to France, and my girlfriend Polly came with me, and she encouraged me. She kept telling me to keep working, sit in front of that word processor and bash away. But as these things do work, she got more and more involved, and I would say, listen to this, what do you think of this? And she'd say, well, that's crap, or that's good, and would come up with ideas herself, and gradually I had to face up to the fact that she was properly contributing and put it in some sort of proper order.
Is that a nice way to work? I mean, is it...
Working on an artistic project with someone you love is great fun, yeah.
You seem to have a huge amount of responsibility with this album. You do so much on it, right up to producing and mixing, doing the whole thing. Are you a control freak, or are you a Renaissance man? Does it mean you do everything?
I'm not really a control freak, I don't think. But I like things to be done properly, and I suppose in the end I become a bit of a perfectionist. I'm not, in many of the stages I'm not, but I become a bit of a perfectionist, and but I don't see myself as being a control freak in the way that other people, like my predecessor in this band, if you like, was.
You're obviously playing the Division Bell, but is any part of the show you kind of visited by ghosts of Pink Floyd past? Do we get a taster of earlier stuff?
I think the whole show it's the haunted house of rock and roll, I suppose. I mean, it's full of references and songs by past members and pieces of video regarding Sid or Roger or whatever. I mean, when you talk about baggage, that's the real baggage we carry. It's sort of 25 years of all the people who've worked with us and done things.
What's your favourite bit?
Well, I've really enjoyed playing Astronomy Domine. In fact, of course, we're changing the show round again, but in America particularly, we were using Astronomy as an opener, and it's a very interesting piece to play because we haven't played it for 20 years plus, and it's a reminder of how Syd Barrett wrote and the sort of his musical style as well as his lyric style, and also an opportunity to use some sort of updated, very old lighting effects.
I wonder if you were surprised. I mean, we can hear some of the fans in the background now, that not only do you have the fans that have grown up with you from the 60s, but there are kids out there who will never have seen a Pink Floyd show before, who might have cottoned on to the music, say, from Dark Side of the Moon or whatever. But there are also even, younger kids in that. Does that surprise you?
Yes, I suppose it does, really, because my original sort of idea of rock and roll was it was something that you sort of chose and represented a sort of peer group idea of what music was, and your parents disapproved of it, and the next generation disapproved of it. And there's this slightly odd thing now of actually attracting this much younger audience. But of course it's terrific, because for us it's very important, because they are probably more receptive to new music than the older generation, because the older generation want to be reminded of their teenage years or whatever, and so they're particularly interested in the old tracks, whereas a younger audience, it's much easier to interest them in what we're doing now.
Playing live is a good It's very satisfying. It's terrific fun. All the other things that go along with touring, such as the sort of slightly trapped feeling one might get having to better oneself or bigger and better oneself every time one goes out, are slightly tedious. And making a record is a kind of entirely different process, which is a different type of satisfaction and enjoyment. But I suppose they're both about the same.
Do you have any contingency plans for the rain? I mean, does the rain make any difference when you play? I was worried about musicians up there with all this vast amount of electrical equipment that people are going to get fried and things like that.
We get wet. Well, I do anyway. I'm sort of in the front, and I don't have a rain cover. There's a certain amount of rain covering up there, which hopefully protects people, but it depends on the strength of the rain and the wind and stuff like that. We did get rained off in Houston completely, but it was near the end of the set, and I was drenched and my guitar stopped working, and more or less had to.
How did I get here? But yeah, I did. Well, it was a punk rocker actually, which was a waste of time because you just end up playing in Pink Floyd anyway. But yeah, there is that. One never dreamt of playing with Pink Floyd because they had a bass player and he sort of wrote an awful lot of it. So it was kind of, it's not something you ever dreamt of. You know, it's kind of beyond that. So yeah, it's very, very special, and I'd recommend it.
Rick he's a piano and organ player, and he's a synthesist as well. Really, my job to start out with is just to take what he did and expand upon it. So we kind of balance it out pretty evenly live. His Hammond and piano, you know, is really important, and I just kind of do what they couldn't do live in the old days, you know, fill it out. But in the studio, we just kind of balance it out together, you know, trade off a lot of times, you know, and it works out really well. Very suited to each other. It's good.
Dave obviously started as the boss and just let me do as I like, just about. And obviously the chords are the same every time because they're the same songs, but I am given complete freedom really, except I do know a bit what the band is about, so that I'm not going to play 1,000 notes when this band only wants 2 or 3. It's more of a mood thing than anything.
A lot of the Pink Floyd sort of second guitar parts are fairly sort of simple, and you know, but they have to kind of be there and allow plenty of space for David to, you know, lead stuff. So it's actually very tempting to play more because there's a lot of space in the music, you know. But yeah, it's kind of a sort of subtle sort of underpinning of what Dave's doing, really.
My name's Adi Wilson. I'm guitar tech for Pink Floyd, and here we are in our little, what we call the tech deck, the area where it all gets looked after. You got over here Guy Pratt's collection of basses and a workstation where Sid looks after him. And walking through, it's where the drum techs live. Right above us is Nick Mason's kit, and you can shine it up through the perspex there. It's a clear ceiling so that his drum tech, Clive, can see what's going on all the time. Moving swiftly along, you've got Clint, the Pale Roadies work area. It's a bit of a mess, but it's the way he likes to live. And above him is Gary Wallace, who plays drums and percussion for Pink Floyd. As you can see what's all going on from there. There's a couple of Dave Gilmour slide guitars here, and his amplifiers are back here, so that Phil Taylor, who does his guitars, has got some control over the matter. There's his workbench and tuning station here, where Phil looks after Dave's guitars, and got a set of steps so that the musicians can come up and down and have a quick wipe with a towel and a drink in between numbers. And this is my workstation here, where I look after Tim Rennick, who's the second guitarist with Pink Floyd. And above us, cunningly screened off, would be the 3 backing vocalists, Sam, Claudia and Durga. So we've got an entire guitar collection here. This bunch, Dave Gilmour's guitars, his Gibson J200 classicals, and a Chet, acoustics even, and a Chet Atkins classical, and Dave's Strats and Telecasters. Tim's Strats there, the Silver being the main one, and acoustics of all nations there for playing the parts that make the people sing.
It's a long time, and it's quite normal for us to be in the studio for a year. Yes. I mean, you look back on it and you think, my God, we could have actually, if we'd done it correctly or done it the right way, we could have only been in there. We could have done the thing in like 6 months. But you know, that's the way it is in studios. Particularly when in our studio, Astoria, which is Dave's home studio. So there's no kind of pressure to, like, there's no financial pressure, if you like, to get in there as soon as, which is nice. I mean, it does give you the freedom. But I do wish, and I'm sure Dave and Nick feel the same, it would be much nicer if we could actually do an album much quicker.
Did you enjoy getting back in the way that you worked? I've been told that you kind of got together and jammed and the songs came out organically. Was it?
I think that was the best idea, is that in the beginning we went and played for 2 weeks. Out of that we had 5 or 6 hours of music, and out of that the album came. So it really was music straight from Dave, myself and Nick.
Some of the critics have said that this album has come out almost like Pink Floyd getting back and recreating their past a little bit, which is obviously really successful. Do you think that's right?
Yes, but I don't, it's a criticism. I think it may be a good criticism, quite honestly. I mean, that's what happens when you get Dave, Nick and myself together. That's what came out. I think that's good.
In rock and roll, we are not allowed the breadth of expression that you are if you write books, for instance. And a lot of journalists particularly get very kind of possessive about the words rock and roll. It's got to be like this, you know. If it's not Bruce Springsteen, it's no good. Do you know what I mean? What I'm trying to say, I think people's attitudes to rock and roll, they think that they're involved in a big, free, liberal, you know, nice thing, but in fact they're extremely conservative.
You seem incredibly comfortable up on stage playing with the group. But,
Yeah.
I mean, how difficult has it been making that transition to being a solo artist?
Well, it's not difficult at all. I mean, playing in a band is playing in a band, and all these musicians are very good and very nice people as well, and so it's easy.
But was it difficult in the intervening period between the end of the Pink Floyd and the solo album, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking?
Yeah, I suppose it takes a while to sort yourself out and to find the kind of people that you really want to play with and gather them together in one place at one time and start sounding like a band. Yeah, it does take a while. I mean, it doesn't just happen overnight.
Did you feel shell-shocked to any extent at the end of it all?
No, I didn't, no.
I mean, the theme of radio chaos.
Go for it, God, bite the bullet.
The theme of radio chaos is about a boy with brain damage from South Wales who ends up in Los Angeles. I mean, what exactly occurs within the scope of the record?
God, there's so many difficult questions. I can't explain the record on television. I cannot start explaining the record on television. Anyway, let's keep running. We'll eventually get to something.
Was there a stage when you started off in the Pink Floyd where you did want, you know, the money as much, the vast quantities of money, as much as the artistic success? But what did you actually want?
Oh yeah, I think when I was kind of 15 years old.
Was the idea of being able to buy a car and a house?
Yeah, all that was... No, it was the idea of not having to get up in the morning that really appealed to me. I loved I thought, I can remember my fantasy extremely well, and it was to have a kind of bachelor flat somewhere, you know, and the idea of waking up at noon. And a very simple life where you got up and you sort of pottered about for a bit and read the papers and maybe had a little light lunch. And then at about 4:30 started thinking about going downstairs to get in the van to go off to the gig up the M1, wherever it was. Then doing the gig and then going home and maybe a little light sex. And then up again at lunchtime for another light lunch and read the papers. And you know, it's a good life, so they tell me. Of course, it never happens like that. Does it, Andrew?
No, it doesn't, Roger. We're still trying, you know.
How did you find the reality of it almost immediately?
God, I can't remember that far back, Chris.
Why was that? Were you taking too much acid in the days of the Pink Floyd?
You never talk to anyone, you know.
No, not at all. It's a very long time ago. It's 20 years ago. Well, I can remember it a bit.
I mean, did the Pink Floyd do a lot of drugs in those times, or was that a myth? I mean, actually, I've never read anywhere, I think that
I think Sid did a fair bit of acid, and we all smoked quite a lot of dope at one time, but I almost never did any acid. I think twice in my life, and nothing else.
Because, of course, you started off as as an R&B stroke blues band, didn't you? Yep. And I mean, I noticed in the rehearsals just now that you were actually playing a blues number.
Yep.
I mean, you obviously feel that's truly part of your roots.
Well, that's where all rock and roll come from. It's all black man's music, you know, it's all come from Africa. Even via the roots of, you know, the kind of the Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan route to what I enjoy. It all comes from Africa in the first place. It's all rooted in the blues.
And this music, actually, on this LP seems extremely danceable. I mean, I can imagine it being played in a club.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to surprise you.
Not at all. I've not met you often before, but I've always recognised that you're a man of great imagination. No, yeah, I can imagine people dancing to it.
I mean, how do you feel about music like hip-hop, for example?
I don't know what hip-hop is. What is hip-hop?
It's a modern form of dance music that comes out of New York.
I don't know anything about
you
it.
do.
I don't know anything about it. I saw the Beastie Boys the other day.
Well, that's a sort of mutant form of...
Is it? Well, I'm sure it's all right, you know, if you like that kind of... Personally, I don't like that kind of thing. But, you know, it's a funny thing about rock and roll. One of the things people find very difficult to accept about it is that it's a very, very broad medium and should be allowed to be extremely broad. And I, in my little compartment, making my concept albums and worrying about monetarism and the bomb and all these things, it's a perfectly legitimate form. And so are, well, maybe not the Beastie Boys, but whoever they were copying is probably a legitimate form as well. That for a particular form, I'm not all that keen on, because it just is, because it's apparently so contrived. And the idea of contrivance in order to make money is something that I find silly. Well, not silly, because making money, I guess, is something everybody's got to make a living, right? But I don't like it. It doesn't mean anything. It's a transitory, silly bit of nonsense that doesn't concern me. Whereas there are other people, you know, who are working in completely different areas than I'm working in myself, who are doing it because that's what they do. And quite rightly. It's a very broad medium, that's all I'm saying.
I mean, who do you consider to be good musical artists at the moment?
Peter Gabriel was the last show I saw that was really was first rate. I've been working on the record and I've been rehearsing, and so I haven't been listening to a great deal of other music, I confess. I don't know, you've caught me at the end of a day's rehearsal and my mind is a bit blank on other artists.
No, in fact, the Beastie Boys is basically the Sex Pistols revisited in terms of the contrived outrage. I mean, the Sex Pistols came along at really the peak of the Pink Floyd success. And did you feel touched by that at all? Did you feel unnerved by it?
I don't think that they touched anyone but the media, personally. Mind you, that's silly for me to say, because obviously there were a lot of kids about who they touched, but I think that the whole punk thing has been blown out of all proportion by the media. It was a marvellous thing for the media to latch onto, you know, because it was a very, very simple and visual idea as well. You know, they had silly haircuts, so magazine covers and this and that and the other, and they went, yeah, we fucking hate fucking area. You know, it's just good media stuff. But it didn't mean anything in terms of the ongoing nature of rock and roll. The only thing, I think, the only positive thing about punk was that it re-established the notion that people who couldn't play instruments were allowed to play rock and roll. And it had very much got to a position where people had got jolly good at playing guitars and keyboard instruments and drums and things. And there wasn't much room on the ground there for young people to go, yeah, we can do this. You know, it had become a bit intimidating. And I think punk was a good thing on those grounds, because it allowed kids to go out and play without worrying about technique too much.
When you started off playing with the Pink Floyd, could you play very well?
I still can't play very well. I've never been able to play an instrument much. It's all bluff, Chris.
Well, bluff and technology?
No, actually very little technology in my case, but quite a lot of bluff. Actually, I have a reasonable sense of time. I don't play many notes, but the ones I do play tend to be reasonably in time.
How many basses do you own?
Well, there's mine. One. I own two. There they are. No, not that one. That one's my proper one, and I've got a spare.
So you've never been an avid collector of,
No.
of instruments?
No.
I mean, do you consider yourself simply as a musician or as an artist in a broader sense?
I don't think about it.
Because I mean, your vision is very visual, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm kind of, I mean, at the moment, I'm fighting for survival. I'm here with all these wonderful musicians, and we rehearse every day, and it is fantastic fun, and I love every second of it. And I'm working madly on quadraphonic tapes and phone calls with filmmakers and this and that to put together the Radio Chaos show, and desperately hoping that we can encourage people to come and see it. Because there's a real resistance, you know, to this kind of work in the marketplace.
To what do you attribute that?
I don't know, you tell me. You know, you see a lot more of what goes on in rock and roll and in shows than I do.
Well, as you say, you know, as you were saying with the Sex Pistols, I mean, it was very easily marketable.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe people are angry with me for leaving Pink Floyd. That's a possibility. Is it?
I wouldn't have thought so particularly.
Oh.
I wouldn't have thought so particularly. But as you said...
That's a weight off my mind.
But as you said, you know, you are not a brand name anymore.
No, I'm not.
Although and the name of the Pink Floyd is, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, but I would have thought that you were known quite well as the principal writer.
Yeah, well, but that doesn't make any difference to people when they buy tickets for concerts. Well, not enough, anyway, to make it a smooth passage.
But yet, I mean, I suppose you're saying that a record like Dark Side of the Moon, people didn't really look at the credits.
But I'm sure a lot of people did. What you mean, see that I wrote most of it? Well, I don't know. I think I haven't the slightest idea.
But I mean, it was an immensely successful record. I mean,
yes, it was.
What do you attribute its success to?
It was a very good record, Chris.
Let's talk about the first song on the album, which is a refrain that continues to come back and I find extremely interesting, and maybe, I guess, the first single, God Wants, Part 1. The very beginning, there are 3 sound effects, which I take is a TV beam going through the channels.
Yeah.
Explain the significance of these 3 pieces, why these bites are important.
Well, visually, the theatre of the album is characterised as a monkey, a gorilla specifically, watching television.
Right.
And so I use the gorilla as a metaphor, I suppose, for the human race.
Yeah.
And he's just flipping channels, looking for something that interests him.
I see. And then he comes across this. The song lists a variety of conflicting views of what God wants.
God wants everything.
Apparently so. Apparently so. And has real no moral, doesn't come down morally on right or wrong, really.
Doesn't seem to, does he?
No. Is this a statement about how badly his word with a capital H has been misinterpreted? Or are you saying that God is confused?
No, I'm just all that not jingoistic, but all that religious bullshit when it's used to bolster our side in a war is extremely distasteful and offensive to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people. It certainly ought to be to all Christians, because that wasn't what Christ was trying to teach. And yet, here we are, apparently, in England and in North America, in apparently mainly Christian countries, and we're still going through all this nonsense about God being on our side. And I thought the whole point was that, that we were supposed to love our enemies. Not that I'm not a practicing Christian myself, but it always staggers me that people who claim to be can stand up and spout like your President, George Bush, can stand up and spout all this bullshit. which is why I have the lyrics in the song about God wants crusade and God wants jihad. Well, it may well be that God doesn't want either of those things, that they're manifestations of the insecurities of the Muslim and Christian communities on the different sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
Time is the title of one song on Dark Side of the Moon. It was written by Roger Waters, one of the original members of Pink Floyd. He once said the song was about the speed with which life passes, which can only be appreciated in retrospect. Roger Waters joins us from our London bureau. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Retrospect might be the operative phrase here. Does the song have the same meaning for you now that it had 20 years ago?
I remember the feeling then. I was 29 years old when it struck me that my life had already started. I think as children we tend to be taught that we're in a preparation for a life that's going to start some way down the line. And it's not pointed out to young people that this is it, you get one shot and it's already started, you know.
How do you explain the appeal across generational lines?
Well, it's a strange thing, you know, it's never actually stopped selling, the record. It's been selling for the whole of the last 20 years. It's been doing about 1 million units a year. And I think there are a number of factors. One is that it very quickly became an album that people wanted in their collections, and successive generations have discovered it. And it has I think thematically it has a universal appeal in that the album is about the potential that all human beings have for making something positive out of their lives, if they so choose.
For the handful of people out there who aren't familiar with the theme of the album, would you just describe it for us? Describe the concept that you try to execute at the time.
Well, it's hard to do that in a couple of phrases, but you know, we're born and we're all subject to the pressures that our particular bit of history throws at us. In our cases, the main pressure that's wrought upon us, in my view, is a kind of free market gone crazy. And if we can make some sense of that, then we certainly in the West have the potential to lead, I don't know, what we could call happy lives, and to contribute something to the world.
Talk to me a little.
But hang on, I haven't quite finished.
Oh, sorry.
It seems that often we're overtaken by dark forces, and we don't achieve our full potential. And that's kind of what the record's about. It's a record of hope.
We can't let you go without asking you about this perennial talk of reunion. First, are you still in touch with the old band members from Pink Floyd?
No, I haven't spoken to them for some time.
Does that suggest that talk of a reunion is at best premature, if not outlandish?
I didn't know there was any talk of a reunion.
Oh, yes. All Pink
really?
All Pink Floyd fans want you guys to get together again. Think it might happen?
No, it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen?
No, there would only be one reason for it happening again, and that would be if we were all skint, and we're not.
That's a British phrase. What do you mean by skint?
Skint, broke, stony.
Oh. Busted, okay. We understand.
You know, when old bands get together again, there's normally one central motivating factor, and that is that they need the money, you know. And people grow as they get older, and they change, and they move in different directions. And the other guys in the band and myself have moved off in separate directions, and I doubt very much if our paths will converge in the future.
Well, Roger Waters,
sorry, fans.
We do want to thank you for what you've contributed, which we still have with us in the form of your recordings and the recordings of the other band members. And allow me to say that we'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
Randall, thank you.
We played some pretty small venues, yeah, but we always had what at the time was a big PA, a big sound system, bigger than anyone else's. So I don't know. But what was bigger than anyone else's 20 years ago was pretty small, yeah. Well, the azimuth coordinator is just a silly name for our quadraphonic sound system. And initially, our quadraphonic sound system consisted of 4 speakers and amplifiers around a room, and we needed a method for making the sound move around, move around the room. So we had to get a system built. And an EMI engineer actually built it for us. Early records, even up to Dark Side of the Moon, we would be doing a track a day. Dark Side of the Moon, well, it didn't take very long recording. But the ones before then, we would generally, I mean, some of the early stuff, reckon to put to bed a track in a day, mixing and everything.
First experience was getting up at 6 o'clock every morning for several weeks. And the second experience was trying desperately not to make an idiot of myself. Pop stars are very bad actors in general. I think I'm an example of that. Elvis Presley, Cliff Richard, David Bowie, Sting. I think they're all very bad actors. I think Bowie is very good live in front of an audience, but I think he needs the audience.
Had a man, a rock and roller, a burned out case, too much drugs, too many shows, in a hotel room somewhere in Los Angeles, and you're watching a television set. And we go into his memory, and we see all the bricks in his life that are built up. His father was killed during the Second World War. His mother overcompensated with too much love, so it's another brick. Went to a very repressive educational system, bad school, another brick. Bad marriage, another brick. So we see this wall build up inside his mind. And then he withdraws from the world, and then we go into his madness, and we see the excess of his madness.
The character I play becomes more and more neurotic and manic depressive, and he physically and figuratively distorts.
It's a combination of real and surreal. It's about memory, which is real, about madness, which is not real. It's, we've combined different filmic techniques. For instance, 15 minutes of the film, which is a 100-minute film, is animation, which we've sprinkled throughout our film. So the fusion of all these things together is kind of unusual. We jump time and place in a very unusual way. So altogether, it started out as to a certain extent, quite experimental.
I disagreed on what this piece was saying, this piece of the film. But in the end now, I agree with it, because what they've done is, I think, wonderful. They've taken what happens in school, not the overall system, and they've said this happens. They try and squash individualism, which is the crucial point. I don't think thought control is true. I think that's wrong, because I think routine makes you think.
Roger couldn't work with me. He forced me out. And they did nothing. No, actually, they couldn't do anything either. It was a kind of blackmail situation where I had to lead. And on the other hand, if he couldn't work with me, it would have been absolutely terrible to stay in that situation anyway. And I think, as history has shown, in the end, it happened in the final. He tried to, and when he couldn't do that, he then tried to take them. I think he was Pink Floyd, and lost that one too.
I harbour some bad feelings about Roger and about the procedure. Yes, I do. Wouldn't you? Sure. I mean, it's not something that I waste a lot of energy on, though. You know, I don't. I don't have any desire to see him or talk to him or any of that stuff. But I'm not going to spend all my energy trying to fight him.
There's no reason why the future might not hold some enormously successful record or show for him.
No one is going to tell me that I'm not Pink Floyd and that we can't do Pink Floyd anymore. I mean, can you believe, could you imagine it? I can't imagine it.
I don't really think about that a lot. I don't know. I hope whatever happens, it's graceful.
Roger's viewpoint, I suspect, is that it's his work that we are getting all the publicity from, that's his viewpoint, is that he should be receiving, all these fans that are out there going to see us should be going to see him, and he feels very aggrieved that they don't understand that, he said it publicly, that he wishes he'd done more publicity stuff and that people understood it better. It's the best show in the world to go and see.
I left the band after the war was made because of Roger. In the future, who knows? He'll be there, I think. I'll be there, definitely.
My motivation is the same motivation as I've had since I was a child, and that is the motivation to be successful, to make music for art's sake, if you like, with a hyphen, you know, to be able to express myself musically and philosophically, if I so choose at any point, and to make money and to meet pretty girls and everything, you know, and nothing's really changed. I mean, I'm the same person. I still have the same motivations. I'm very unbelievably lucky. It seems to be. Well, that's another advantage of not being, you know, not being that close one-on-one visual thing, you know, where we're promoted by our beauty. You know, they don't mind if we don't look that good sometimes. As long as we can play the music, that's what matters.
We did 2 nights in Connecticut and Hartford, and the first night there were a couple of cherry bombs and they were shouting and screaming through everything, and I stood there on stage and I thought, Jesus Christ, what have I done? You know,
here it is all back in my face
I can't handle 2 or 3 weeks of this. And I got really, really depressed. So the next day I went straight to the radio station and harangued them for about an hour about, you know, how difficult it is actually to perform under those circumstances. If they're clearly not listening to you because they're whistling, so if they're performing as well, then you have to go into a Class B show where you accept that that's not going to happen and you put up the wall and perform behind it. And then and just concentrate technically on trying to do what you do as well as you can. But you never get those sparkly magic moments that sometimes occur live.
If you're a person who's always believed in communication between the band and the audience, how did a situation like Montreal in 1977, where 110,000 people went out of control on you, ever happen?
Greed, you know, and ego. I think greed and ego are responsible for most stadium gigs. Oh, we can sell 90,000 tickets, or, you know. And then the little man comes rushing into the dressing room and, have you seen how much we grossed? And everybody gets excited. And after a bit, you realize that that's all they're about, really.
Montreal, with all those people just not listening, that was the final straw?
Yeah, well, that whole tour was a real drag, those stadium gigs. That's the only tour we ever did where we did lots of big stadiums. And I really hated it. I hated it. And Montreal was the final straw. I mean, it's a famous story now that I actually was, you know, I ended up spitting at some guy who was in the front row there, and I thought, Jesus Christ, have I been brought to this? It's a story that I make up about rock and roll, and really from what I've observed more of other people. I mean, I've never smashed up a hotel room in my life, but I know a lot of people who have, and it's an aberration that I've witnessed at close quarters and that I've wondered about quite a lot.
It seemed to be almost the nightmares that could grow out of rock and roll getting out of hand.
Well, it's also about the kind of aberration that I've already discussed slightly in terms of the stadiums, for instance, you know, and those kind of numbers of people and the power that you get, the kind of mind-numbing power that you can wield in a thing like that. If you get a big enough PA, you know. It's almost as if it's a kind of sadomasochistic thing where the audience want to be hurt in some more strange way, because they know there are going to be 2,000 or 3,000 drunken people there who are likely to throw bottles at them, or I don't know what it is.